Franklin Storm Research Center.
Dad was kind of allergic to his name in big letters.
Which reminds me, I think that the four of us should have a name.
Why would we need a name?
Because we're a team now, and there's four of us, so we should come up with a name for it.
Like the Human Torch and the Torchettes.
Ugh.
No.
Kidding me? How about the big brain and his neurons?
How about the big brain and her neurons?
How about two guys, a girl, and the thing that nobody wanted?
Hey, we both know that you could take him.
Hey.
What? Come a long way since the garage.
Gotta say, it's fantastic.
Say that again?
It's fantastic.
Yes, it is. Guys, I got it. Ready?
Yeah.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and today we are going to be talking about Fant4stic 4. That is the 2015 film stylized as Fant4stic, I guess we'd say, with the 4 replacing the second A. And joining me to discuss this cinematic something or other is Eoin Smith. How you doing, Eoin?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm, like I said before we started recording, I'm doing okay despite having to rewatch this movie last night. But before we peel off that particular Band-Aid, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm here in Aberdeen, Scotland. I'm an author. I'm a magician. And just a kind of an all-round creative. I like to turn my hand to lots of creative things. So yeah, and also a self-confessed superhero nerd.
Well, you're in very good company here, then. We can tell you that much. But that's an interesting combination, author and magician. So why don't you tell people a little bit more about both of those things?
Absolutely. So I'm a magician because of my dad. My dad's a professional magician, and yeah, I kind of grew up around it. I was never forced into wanting to become a magician myself, but when you grow up around that, why could you not become fascinated with it? And it's just a really fun thing to do. I work at lots of events, but I've also recently written a show with 3 other magicians, and we've creatively titled that show 4 Magicians. And we go out and we kind of perform around Scotland, which is great. And then in terms of being an author, it's kind of the thing that I've always wanted to do since I was a little kid. Whether I was reading novels, whether I was reading comics, I just absolutely love the written word. So yeah, I've written a few short stories and some kind of comedy things that have been published in various places around the world. And I think what connects both of those things for me, the magic and the writing, is it's about connection. It's about reaching out to an audience and trying to communicate something to them. And that's what really inspires me as a creative. Very cool. It's a very interesting connection. Never would have put that together, but yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I'm not going to ask you too much about the magician stuff because I'm in the middle of the Arrested Development rewatch, and I don't want to get you blackballed from the Alliance of Magicians. But about your writing, do you have anything that you're working on now, or anything that's coming out in the near future? Yeah, so I'm working on a few different short stories. They're all kind of sitting with various people waiting to see if they're going to get published. So nothing that I can kind of confirm kind of publication dates just now. But yeah, I've got a few things in the works that are really I'm excited about. Some of the stuff I'm proudest of working on. Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So, you did mention that you have been into you're a superhero nerd. So how did that come about? When did you? And you mentioned you've read comics too. So how did you start getting into superheroes and comics and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, there's a couple of really great comic shops here in Aberdeen. And the first one that I got kind of hooked on is a shop called Plan 9. Obviously named after the classic film Plan 9 from Outer Space. And yeah, it's just a great little treasure trove of stuff. And my dad was a comic reader when he was a kid. And he used to take me in there kind of at the weekends, and I used to get to pick out comics and stuff. And I just kind of fell in love with the stories. I fell in love with the way you can kind of see elements of yourself in a superhero, but also they've got those elements of the, for lack of a better word, fantastic. And I think that, yeah, I've just kind of grown up loving them. And then, you know, the very first comic I ever bought was the Avengers, a copy of the Avengers. And so seeing the films and stuff's been really exciting for me over the years. And then I vividly remember that first moment sitting in the cinema watching the first Avengers film on, I think it was the night it came out. And my friends were all kind of like, yeah, this is cool, because they'd seen like the films leading up to it. But I'm going, this is like my childhood dream come to life. This is really exciting. So even the worst superhero films, I've got a soft spot for. And because I've got that kind of love of seeing stuff on screen that I grew up reading about.
Yeah, I try to have a soft spot for even the bad ones, and there are some that I absolutely do have a soft spot for. Like, I will still defend Ben Affleck's Daredevil. I will still defend the David Hasselhoff Nick Fury telefilm. So there's and so I'll defend the original Doctor Strange movie from 1978, I think it was. So there's some of them I will defend, but there are other ones that. And doing this podcast, one of the nice things about doing this podcast, and Batman and Robin, I will always defend Batman and Robin because I think it is absolutely a great adaptation of Batman 66. But there's other stuff, and one of the nice things about doing this show has been, you know, kind of forcing myself to go back to these old things that I may have written off the first time I watched it, or never even given a chance to begin with, and then kind of trying to see what little nuggets of good stuff I can find within them. So I do try to approach most of the movies we talk to on with that kind of idea in mind. We'll talk about how that worked out with this movie. Every now and then there's a film that you just can't really find anything. You dig and you just can't really find it. But anyway, that's really cool. That seems like your dad's had a lot of influence on you, both in the magician side of things and also in the comic book side of things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both my parents are massive readers, so I get my love of reading from both of them. Apparently I was that, and like, you know, it's nice to read to your kids, but apparently I was like, when I was really, really young, I was just constantly, I wanted them to read to me all the time. And both my parents also really instilled a love of music in me. So we still travel the country going to gigs and concerts and things to get the three of us, because we all love that kind of live entertainment experience as well as kind of enjoying stuff on record. So yeah, I think the kind of cultural side of what I'm into is massively heavily influenced by both my parents.
That's very cool. So is your dad still a comic reader? I know you said he was back when you were younger.
Yeah, he kind of fell out of it, and then when I started getting interested in them, he kind of went back into it. So yeah, quite often Christmas presents and stuff will include a graphic novel, going both ways, and we
cool.
recommend stuff to each other that we've enjoyed reading. So yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never had that experience myself. My dad was not a comic reader. I did get some stuff from him, like he loved the James Bond movies. He loved Indiana Jones. So those types of things definitely influenced me. But comics, he never really cared for. He didn't really have any sort of interest in that stuff. So, and now I've got two kids myself, and they're starting to get into superhero stuff. They're too young to start reading it on their own yet, but they're already interested in like watching it, having me read like the children's versions of some of the stories to them. And so it's going to be interesting. I'm curious what the relationship is going to be like when they get older, and if they end up also start getting into comics too. So that's really cool to see that there are people who have that kind of template out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and another thing I like to ask, every guest on here is what's been grabbing your interest lately? Anything that you're watching, you're reading, playing, anything like that that you're kind of getting interested in?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I'm currently reading the first volume of trade paperback of the Federal Bureau of Physics, which is kind of interesting. It's like a sci-fi comic series that's um, there are these kind of anomalies in space-time, and basically a government agency has been set up to deal with them. They're like an extra emergency service. You can phone 911 in the US and ask for physics, and people will come out and try and solve these anomalies, and there's kind of a conspiracy going around it. So I'm only kind of partway through the first volume of that, but it's really quite cool, and the art's lovely. I'm really enjoying that.
I've never heard of that, but I just looked it up, and it's I don't recognize the writer's name, Simon Oliver, but Robbie Rodriguez, I recognize him because if I'm not mistaken, I think he did the Spider-Gwen design originally, or maybe I'm getting a mistake with someone else.
Oh, I'm not sure.
I'll have to
But
double check that.
it's a really good. It's kind of quite gripping. So I think it's finished now. I think it's a few years old. So I think there's maybe three or four trade paperbacks. So I'm looking forward to kind of grabbing the others and working my way through them as well.
Okay, yeah, it is. He did co-create Spider-Gwen, which is so. I'm definitely familiar with his art style, and that your pitch and knowing that his art is involved in it definitely makes me want to go check this out now. This sounds really
Yeah,
interesting.
it's really cool. And then the other thing that I'm watching just now is me and my wife have taken a step back into the 90s, and we are rewatching Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman.
Oh yeah.
Um, just as pure nostalgia, we watched. We were quite late to the party with Superman and Lois, and we kind of binged the four seasons of that in a couple of weeks because we really enjoyed it. And then we were like, you know what, we want a true nostalgia trip. So we've gone back and are watching that kind of classic super camp 90s series. And actually, I think maybe I look back on it with maybe a bit of I think I remember enjoying it as a kid, and I wasn't sure how it was going to hold up as an adult. And actually, I've gone back and watching it and going, yeah, okay, there's bits of it that are a bit hokey and the special effects aren't great, but I'm actually really enjoying it. It's good fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and I think that's kind of part of the joy of it.
Yeah, that show is it's interesting to see the different fan reactions when they're going back and watching it now. Because
Yeah,
like you, I also grew up watching it. I remember loving it as a kid. And that was like my main Superman thing when I was,
yeah,
like 10 years old or something like that, whatever it was. So I loved it back then. But now I tried rewatching it about like maybe like 5 years ago now, and oh, it was rough for me. It definitely did not hold up for me. But it seems like those are the two divisions. There are the people who either they go back and they watch it, and like you, they can find stuff they're enjoying in it. Or the other camp is my camp, where we're just like, oh yeah, we're really seeing the flaws in this now.
yeah. And don't get me wrong, there are flaws.
There are, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But I am with you on Superman and Lois. I love that show, and um, maybe he'll be upstaged come July, but for now, Tyler Hoechlin is my favorite version of Superman in live action. I think
yeah,
he's as much respect as I have for Christopher Reeve. I feel like Tyler Hoechlin really did a great job of capturing a more human version of Superman, and the whole pairing him. Like Superman as a dad is just so perfect, and it's
yeah,
mind numbing that nobody thought to do it before like the past 10 years.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I kind of I watched a lot of the Arrowverse kind of stuff early on, and I kind of fell out of quite a lot of it because it became too soap opera for me quite a lot of the time. And I liked that obviously this was kind of part of that, but kind of off to the side a bit, and did its own thing, and it remained kind of kind of more serious. I think throughout it, it was, there's obviously still moments of levity, and it's lighthearted in the fact that it's a superhero thing. But yeah, it just felt like it was kind of, because it had shorter seasons and stuff. It was telling a cohesive story. It didn't have filler episodes like the some of the other stuff that's kind of longer form.
Yeah, I share your opinion on the Arrowverse. I was completely clued into it all the way up until the end of Crisis. Although I'd started to fall behind on Supergirl, and I didn't see the first season of Batwoman. But all the other stuff, I was completely locked into. I was, every week it was like appointment viewing for me. And that first season of The Flash is still like one of the greatest superhero adaptations ever. I think that is just amazingly well done.
Absolutely agree. The first season of The Flash is amazing.
Yeah, and Arrow too. Like the first season of Arrow, I had some gripes with it at first because it really had this kind of, we don't want to admit we're a superhero show kind of feel to it, but I can look back on it now and still kind of appreciate, this kind of like pulpy take on Green Arrow. And even though it was more of an ersatz Batman than Ollie, I still dug it for what it was. And but yeah, then after Crisis, there was just such a massive nosedive in the quality of the shows that I felt like they really just kind of lost direction. And like, I still haven't seen the last season of Supergirl. I've been trying. I've watched like a few episodes here and there, and it's hard to get through. The last 2 seasons of The Flash, I made an effort because I stuck with the show that long to watch it, but it was tough going.
I tried to stick with The Flash and I couldn't. I gave up.
Yeah. When it got into the whole like the different forces and all that, and how they were calling Barry and Iris their parents, it was really kind of off-putting, I felt. And so that was where I really started to clue out of it. And then I was still excited though for Superman and Lois. I was still, just because I loved Tyler Hoechlin and the appearances he had there. I didn't have much of an opinion one way or the other on Elizabeth Tulloch. Like, she was fine in the parts I saw her in, but she didn't really have a whole lot to work with there. So I was really curious, and like just from the first episode, it grabbed me and it just didn't let go, and I was on board for it the entire way through. Some minor quibbles here and there, but sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we just because of the feelings that we had for the Arrowverse, we just kind of, although I'd enjoyed Tyler Hoechlin in it, we just kind of steered clear of it. And then when it was kind of finishing up, and then we started to get some, clips of it were popping up on like Instagram and YouTube and stuff, and we went, this actually looks a lot better than we thought it was going to be, based on the latter Arrowverse stuff. So we was like, all right, we're going to sit down and watch it because it's all available now. Quite guilty for waiting for a series to be finished or a season to be finished before we dive into it, because we like to just sit and like absorb it. We're doing that with Daredevil Born Again. I haven't watched any of that yet because we're waiting for the first season to be done, and then we're just going to sit and binge it. So yeah, I think that it was quite cool, and we got to just sit and watch it like all in one chunk. And yeah, just absolutely loved it. And really kind of felt it was almost like, because it had become a big part of our routine for a couple of weeks, and then it felt like there was a hole after that.
Yeah, I had,
which we've filled with Camp 90s Superman.
I definitely get your trepidation about it going in, because especially when they said that it was going to be about Superman and Lois and their teenage sons, and they were going to be twins, and you're going to have one of them who was like the jock and one of them who was more of like the outcast. It really rang the CW alarm bells off. But fortunately, it wasn't that. It was very well done. I thought the teen drama stuff was very subdued compared to what we saw in other stuff. And I think you'd said that because it also had shorter seasons. I think that was a really smart idea, because it allowed them to really spend their money on the things that they felt really mattered. So yeah, I was definitely on board for all that. For my part, I have been watching Daredevil Born Again week to week, and I have really been enjoying it. I won't spoil anything here, but it's been a great run so far. I think we've only got like 2 episodes left though, and that's going to be disappointing. Right now our our routine is it comes out on Wednesdays here in Japan, and so the other thing that we love is my wife and I are both really into Ganable. It's this Japanese series that's on it's on Hulu, I think internationally, but it's on Disney Plus here in Japan, and it's a really good like thriller series, and so our like Wednesday night routine is I get home from work late that night, and so we watch Ganable, she goes to bed, and then I watch Born Again. Also, I just started playing the new the RoboCop video game on PS5 because that just came out on the PlayStation Plus free account, so I was able to snag that for free and just started diving in, and it's really cool stepping back into that world. It's one of my favorite movies, so getting a chance to actually jump into that world has been really fun.
That's cool. I'm more of an old school gamer. I don't have anything newer than a PlayStation 2. So the PS2 and the N64 get some decent rotation in our house. But yeah, I've never quite got into the kind of whole like PS5 stuff. I've watched a few. I've watched Twitch streamers and stuff and got hooked on it. But yeah, for me, I've always kind of gone back to those kind of older games that I loved as a kid.
I will say I do wish I still had my my old Xbox or PS2 because there were some awesome superhero games on there that I was lucky that I got Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1 and 2 like the last time they were on sale in the PlayStation Store. So I have those and I can play them on my PlayStation 5. But like the Hulk Ultimate Destruction, the Punisher game, Ultimate Spider-Man, all that stuff that I wish I could play again and I can't. And I've just been trying to think about I keep researching like different computer builds to see how I can build an emulation computer that can handle Xbox stuff. And it's just me wanting to justify having to invest the amount of money into it that it would take to do something like that. But anyway, like I said, today we are talking about the 2015 Fantastic Four film, directed by Josh Trank. So Ian, what is your history with the Fantastic Four? I know you said that, one of your first comics was the Avengers. You're really excited for the Avengers stuff. So I'm probably not out of line to assume that you are a Marvel fan in general, but what's your relationship with the FF?
Yeah, so I read Fantastic Four comics as a kid. I don't think they weren't like one of the ones they weren't one of my main series that I picked up. But I enjoyed them when I did. I remember watching the cartoon in the 90s. So I was definitely aware of the Fantastic Four. I mean, there's obviously the two earlier films that, they're not great either, but they've got some fun, kind of, they're bright, colorful comic booky films. They've got some fun elements to them. So yeah, I mean, Fantastic Four is definitely something I was aware of, something that I knew the stories, I knew the things that they were based on. Looking at obviously the 2015 Fantastic Four, probably based more on the Ultimate Fantastic Four, and I have to say I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm massively up on the Ultimate Universe. I know bits and pieces of it, but so for me this was quite a new take because I wasn't as wasn't as aware of all of the elements of the Ultimate kind of side of things.
Yeah, I'm very similar types of things here between you and me because I never really I do remember watching the Fantastic Four cartoon here and there. It's part of the Marvel Action Hour. I think it was on UPN if I'm not mistaken, or the predecessor to UPN, whatever it was. And it was Fantastic Marvel Action Hour. It was Fantastic Four and it was Iron Man, and I gravitated more to the Iron Man side of that than the Fantastic Four side. And apparently I'm not alone because that cartoon is despised among Fantastic Four fans, so much so that in the comics that were being published at the time, they had a scene where Johnny and Ben are complaining about the show and like complaining about the fact that they license out their likenesses to this really crappy animated series.
Oh, I love that. Love that.
Yeah. Which apparently there was something similar done with this film too, because apparently, because that's another there are two connections that this has, that Fantastic Four cartoon. One is the fact that just like Marvel parodied that cartoon in the 90s, they also parodied this movie, where in an issue of Punisher, these versions of the Fantastic Four were apparently killed in an explosion. But also, Josh Trank had said that he was a Fantastic Four fan, when really the only knowledge he had of the Fantastic Four came from that animated series.
Yeah, I read that when I was obviously doing some reading around the film as well, over the last kind of week or so. And yeah, I read that and I was like, oh my God, that's what a way to blag your way into a job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very ignoble start to this to this endeavor. And you know, like, I had dipped in and out of Fantastic Four at different points. Like, I read the Mark Waid stuff run because I love Mark Waid, and that was really good. I've gone back and I've read some of the Lee and Kirby stuff, and I have like all those epic collections sitting on my Kindle that I'm planning to get to at some point. So it's and I liked the Jonathan Hickman run, but mostly not very familiar with them. My late co-host, who founded the show with me, he loved the Fantastic Four. Like, Fantastic Four to him was like the Bible of the Marvel Universe. And it was just one of those things that it could never really quite speak to me the way it speaks to other people. So I was never really that big of an FF fan. And as for the other two movies, you know, we did a pair of episodes on those a while back with my buddy Kellen Conley, and he's also a big Fantastic Four fan. And going back and looking at those movies, there's some good stuff in there that I think got overlooked at the time, and I think the movies got unfairly maligned in a lot of ways because of that. I think especially when you get to Rise of the Silver Surfer, the Galactus Cloud stuff aside, if you just look at that quartet, I think they really kind of clued into who these four characters are and how they interact with each other in that second movie. And then, of course, we never got a third, so they never got a chance to build on that foundation. And also Doom, it just seems like they can't get Doom right, because there was, you know, there was those two films, Doom and there, Julian McMahon, good actor in general, but just like he wasn't the right pick, and just like the material they gave him wasn't good at all. And this, you know, Toby Kebbell also just somehow worse. Yeah, I don't know how, but somehow worse.
He doesn't really have anything to do in the film. He's around at the start as kind of, you know, they've, you know, going for that kind of classic, like, hey, they're kind of frenemy kind of thing. And then he kind of disappears, and then just appears right at the end again, basically to give the film an ending, because it's kind of meandering along. I've got a real love-hate with this film. I've probably watched it 2 or 3 times now. I've definitely had watched it more than once before rewatching it for this, and I really like the early part of this film, where it's like growing up, and there's like Reed Richards is the scrappy kind of inventor, Ben Grimm's there as the friend, they're recruited by the Baxter Foundation. I kind of like that sort of bit, and then it's almost like, it's like once they get into the teleportation machine or whatever it's called, and go, then for me it just falls apart. But I liked that kind of origin side of it. The first part of that, where you saw them kind of coming together, and it was kind of like one of those kind of, I just enjoyed that first bit of it, and I was rewatching it for this and thinking, I did quite enjoy that bit, and then they got their powers, and I thought, what is this mess?
So yeah, you'd mentioned the Ultimate Fantastic Four, which this was definitely influenced by the Ultimate Fantastic Four. I never read that whole series, but I did read the first 2 trades, I think it was.
Okay.
And yeah, they're a much younger take on the FF and that too. And it is this idea of like them getting their powers by going to the negative zone, which here they call Planet Zero for some bizarre reason. I don't know why. But and one of the biggest problems with this movie, and I see what you're saying about that interaction, the early stuff. My whole thing is, if you're gonna divert from the source material, what you're gonna give me instead has to be really interesting. And so,
Yeah.
like, I look at Constantine is a good example of this. And I came around to that movie. I hated it at first, but now when I watch it, I do actually really dig it. I think it's a fun movie. I think they do a really good job with it, even though it's very divorced from the source material. Another example is Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, those characters, with the exception of Rocket and possibly Groot, are very different from who they are in the comics.
Yeah.
But what James Gunn gave us instead was so magical that I was willing to completely overlook all that. This one, if it was not called the Fantastic Four, I think I would have enjoyed the first part a lot more. But since it was called Fantastic Four, and it just wasn't interesting enough to pull me away from my preconceived notions of those characters. And I think that's really kind of what my problem falls in with the first half of it. And another problem too is just, I think they had picked the wrong people for this movie. Part of it could also be the fact that Mark Miller was Fox's creative consultant for their Marvel movies, which personally, I'm of the mind that Mark Miller represents everything that is terrible about modern day superhero comics. So. But what they had brought in Josh Trank, who we've covered before on this show, back when we covered Chronicle. I'm not sure if you ever saw that movie.
Loved that movie, and that made me so excited for when I knew that he was going to do a take on the Fantastic Four, and they were like, yeah, we're going to do that kind of Chronicle, sort of slightly more grounded, realistic sort of side to it. I thought, oh, this is going to be awesome. I was really excited for this film. Which is partly why it was such a disappointment as well.
Yeah, see, here's where I think the problem is, because I don't think you can do gritty and grounded with the Fantastic Four and make it come off as sincere.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at what Marvel's, going to be bringing out this summer, with their kind of 60s inspired Fantastic Four, and you look at that and you go, that is the Fantastic Four. That is the group has leapt off of the page onto the screen completely.
And you know what? I was not so keen on the 60s aesthetic, because people have been talking about, ever since Marvel got the rights back, fans everywhere have been saying like, oh, they should make it a 60s period piece. I was of the mind that you don't have to do that. I don't think that's necessary. I think you can do it in the modern day, but still have it capture the FF magic. And then when they announced that was what they were going to do, I was like, oh, okay, whatever. But then when I saw that first trailer, I'm just like, oh, okay, yeah. You have my attention now, sir. I am definitely on board for what we got here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't feel like, I love Marvel movies. I've seen them all, but some are definitely better than others. And I think that, they do have a tendency, some of them feel a bit cookie cutter, and you could almost interchange the superheroes in those, the characters, and it wouldn't make much difference. So it's the stuff like Guardians of the Galaxy, and things like that. This feels like it's its own thing. It is part of that universe, but feels like it's going to be something really different. And I think that's what the Marvel universe needs more of. They kind of tried to do that with Eternals. It maybe didn't quite work out how they wanted it to, but they tried to make something different. And I think they need to keep doing that. And yes, some things are going to fail, but they can't keep going with every film feeling too similar. There needs to be distinction between those kind of sub franchises, and I think so. I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with this one.
Yeah, I think you're right. I definitely agree with that. And Eternals, really, the thing about Eternals that I had a problem with it was, I think it's very similar criticism I have about the 2015 Fantastic Four, is that you are giving us something different from what we've seen in what we've come to expect from the MCU. That's fine. Yeah. But I don't think this was the way you should have done that with these properties. Like with Eternals, I think you just have to lean full into the out there wacky Kirby space magic stuff. And I think you got to take those big swings, which recently we had covered Quantumania on the show. And while it didn't turn out great, one of the things that I did admire for it was it did take some big swings with the wacky science stuff. And I really think I wanted more of that from Eternals than what we got.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of Quantumania, but I appreciated the fact that they tried to do something different. You know, when you compare that to the first Ant-Man film, you know, there's a marked difference in tone, in style and everything. And yeah, they tried to do something, and you know, as I said earlier, not everything's going to hit, but it's worth taking those risks.
Exactly. But we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come right back and we'll talk more about this movie. Ever have a situation where you want to watch something on Netflix, but it's only available in another country? Or are you nervous about using public Wi-Fi networks without any protection? Then what you need is a VPN, or virtual private network. A VPN is essentially your own superhero mask that protects your device's secret identity from prying eyes. In these uncertain times, protecting yourself on the internet is more important than ever to prevent your data from being sold to the highest bidder. But free VPNs don't offer the security they promise, so a subscription VPN is best. I've been a loyal user of ExpressVPN for years. It's got fast speed, great support, and is very easy to use. Just install ExpressVPN on your device or Wi-Fi router, click a button, and you've got instant protection. You can also select which country you want to browse from, which gets around geo-blocking on streaming services like Netflix and Disney+. If you'd like to try out ExpressVPN, you can get a free trial by clicking the link in the show notes. So what are you waiting for? Start protecting yourself today. Since you're listening to this show, I already know you love watching superhero movies and TV shows, and you just might enjoy superhero comics. But how about superhero novels? I'm giving away 2 free superhero novels and 1 free superhero short story. Visit percivalconstantine.com/SCP to get access to Vanguard, Heroes Forged, the first novel in my own Avengers and X-Men inspired superhero novel series, and Ronin Born, my cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic Japan. I'm also throwing in Fire and Lightning, a free prequel story to my new Power Rangers-inspired superhero series, Omega Knights. So visit percivalconstantine.com/SCP, those are just the letters SCP, to get started, or click on the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. And we are back. So, like I mentioned, Josh Trank was brought on as the director, and back when we covered Chronicle, my late co-host Derek, he made the point at that time that when he had found out that they got the Chronicle director to come in and do the Fantastic Four movie, right away his expectations dropped. And the reason was because he couldn't understand why someone would watch Chronicle and think, this guy should direct Fantastic Four, because it just seems like such a tonal mismatch for those two franchises. And when I watched Chronicle, and I'd seen Fantastic Four before I even saw Chronicle, and then when we went back and watched Chronicle, I had the exact same feeling. I'm like, I think Chronicle is an amazing movie. It's really well done, but that is not the guy you want to do the Fantastic Four. That's the guy you want to do like Rising Stars or something like, or Miracle Man or something like that. Something that is very dark and grounded and gritty. Josh Trank could knock that out of the park, I think. But for this, you really need someone like, well, like, you know, we're seeing what we're getting with who's the director of First Steps? John Waters, I think is his name, or
yeah, I think.
Yeah, maybe I'm not, but you know, like Brad Bird. Brad Bird was always like my ideal choice for Fantastic Four director, because you watch The Incredibles and you're like, that's it. That's exactly what you need out of an FF movie. Or Matthew Vaughn, even. Matthew Vaughn, you know, he can do this kind of like, you know, he can do this kind of stuff that's really, he's got this really kind of charming, kind of quirky style that I think would work for the Fantastic Four as well. And he did the period stuff with First Class, which mostly worked pretty well, I thought. I did have some issues with it, but as far as like the way he depicted the period part of it, I thought he did a pretty good job with that. And then, but when they got in Josh Trank, they also hired Jeremy Slater as the screenwriter. And Slater had a very different movie in mind than Trank had. Slater's idea was he wanted to base it off of the Avengers movie. He wanted to make it very similar in tone to that, which I think, especially at this time in 2015, would have been the right move to make. But Trank did not want to do that, and basically he left Slater out of discussions with Fox, and he even withheld notes. And like all the notes from Fox Studios between Trank and the producers, Slater said, I never saw 95% of those notes. And he left the production after 6 months. And every single idea that Slater, you know, proposed, Trank shot it down right off the bat. And also Trank said that his when he was in the production set, he said that his influences for this film were his biggest influence was David Cronenberg. That it would have been like Scanners and The Fly was influencing the look of the film, and that the overall tone would be a cross between Spielberg and Tim Burton, which, yeah, that all sounds interesting, but not for the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, and I mean, I can definitely see that element of The Fly. There's a bit just after they get their powers, and it's almost like that sort of body horror sort of element of, especially when you see Miles Teller lying there all like stretched out and a bit kind of mangled and looking a bit, looking like he's gone through something. I think that you can see where that sort of Cronenberg element came in. And I remember at the time, I mean, at the time I hadn't heard these things about, you know, I probably wasn't as up on like reading about the making of films at that point. I was just enjoying the films. So yeah, I hadn't heard all of these things that were going on. I read an interview with Slater this week that said there was only one line of his that remained in the final film, which was when Reed says "Don't blow up" a couple of times. Apparently that was his only contribution to the film, even though he still gets a writing credit. But yeah, so at the time, I just remember hearing like, "Oh, this is going to be a different take on the Fantastic Four," and I thought, "Cool, I'm down for that." Like, because I wasn't massive, because I knew of the Fantastic Four, but it wasn't like a thing that was precious to me. I was like, cool, I'm up for seeing something different. And then I saw it and I thought, oh, this isn't the Fantastic Four. What's this?
Yeah, in the lead up to this film, I wasn't following necessarily the day-to-day behind the scenes as heavily as some fans were, but some stuff definitely seeped in and fell on my radar. And my attitude, whenever there's all this behind the scenes stuff that's coming out during production, my attitude is always wait and see, because you never know how it's going to turn out. Because I've been burned before, and I have prejudged stuff that later on I went back and I'm like, oh wow, that was actually really freaking good. And other stuff where I'm just like, oh, this is going to be awesome, this is going to be the best thing ever. And then I watch, I'm like, oh my god, that was terrible. So, I definitely had that. So I definitely had the attitude going into this is like, I'm just gonna hang back, wait and see what happens, right? I'm not going to pay too much attention to the behind the scenes stuff. And, stuff like having a black actor for Johnny Storm, that didn't mean a goddamn thing to me. I did not care one way or the other. So that didn't bother me at all. And so I'm just like, let's just see what happens. We'll see what it looks like when it comes out. And I was willing to give it a chance, even after seeing the trailers and seeing it wasn't what I'd expect from the FF. I was still like, I'm still going to give it a chance. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to give it an honest shot. And I've always said that the biggest sin any of these superhero movies can make is be boring. That is like the big deal breaker for me. If it's bad, make it epically bad.
Yeah.
But if it's just like, if it puts me to sleep, then you have failed at the number one thing that a superhero movie is supposed to do, which is excite you.
Yeah.
And that's what I felt the first time I watched this, and when I rewatched it again last night, is that this movie is cinematic Valium.
I'm not gonna lie, I actually did fall asleep watching it, and I had to rewatch the second half of it. When I was rewatching it for this podcast, because I was like, I was kind of watching it, and then I woke up and the credits were rolling. I was like, oh damn it, I'm gonna have to go back.
Yeah, I think I dozed off at one point as well, and I did it. And now that I think back about the first time I watched it, I think I dozed off when I watched it the first time too. So yeah, I mean this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just. Yeah, you're right. It just doesn't. I don't think all superhero films need to be action, action, action. I think that's a trap that a lot of films fall into. And I think, yes, there's definitely space for character and world building, but there's not enough going on even of that in this film. That even though I like that first half, it could have been shorter. Like they could have compressed that bit and had longer of them, learning to cope with their powers and stuff. It's basically like, oh, we've got our powers, and then it's like 1 year later, and they've got control over them. Like, where we kind of missed out on that whole part of them, like getting to grips with what has happened to them. Possibly the most interesting part of the story of getting these powers. You think of like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man stuff, and it's, I can picture him like looking at his hand and seeing the little things coming out of his hand and him climbing up the wall and learning how to climb up a wall. I can picture him learning how to swing on a web. You don't get that in this film. It's just, oh, they've had the accident, and then, oh, they can use their powers. There's no depiction of that journey, which I think is so important in an origin story for the Fantastic Four, because these are massively altering, these powers are altering their day-to-day lives, and because every power is so different, everyone's going through different struggles, and we just don't get to see any of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things I had a problem with too is just like, there is just way too much buildup until that point when they go to Planet Zero. And it's just like, I wish, if anything, like try and shoot some of those scenes, present some of those scenes out of order in a flashback style or something, so that we're getting we're front loading a little bit more of action, a little bit something to be the beginning. Something that builds up suspense, something that builds up intrigue, like how do they get to this point, especially with the fact that, we do that 1 year later jump after Reed escapes, and it's, well, why don't we start off with Reed being on the run and Ben being this military asset, and then jump back in time? I think that'd be a much more interesting way to, at least with what they had here in this movie, it would be a much more interesting way to present what they wanted to present with the theatrical cut here.
I think filmmakers tend to have this idea that, especially for like a superhero origin story, you have to tell it linearly, and it's just so not true. I think that. I think, what you're suggesting there, starting off with Reed as a fugitive, and having more of him like having to go out and gather the parts to try and rebuild the machine himself and stuff, and that Ben as the government. I did have to laugh that they talked about how he was going on covert operations, and like, he's a giant rock monster. How on earth is that covert? But it was so like. That's quite an interesting take on it, and if you're going to go down a different angle, lean into it, and as you say, reveal that kind of, as much as I liked the bit about them kind of developing this, I would have been quite happy for that to have been split up through flashbacks throughout the film. That wouldn't have bothered me at all, because you still get that interesting kind of, or semi-interesting backstory bit, but it's interspersed with some of the more kind of comic booky elements.
Yeah, I feel like, especially at this time period, executives who were not working for Marvel Studios had this idea that they just didn't understand superheroes. And so there's this idea of, we need to front load all this build up and character stuff in the first half of the movie before the characters get their powers. And in some cases, that's done in a short form. A compressed time frame compared to the rest of the movie. Like, you mentioned Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Spider-Man doesn't show up in that, Peter doesn't become Spider-Man until probably around the 20-minute mark in that movie or something like that. But it's like a 2-hour movie. So it's a relatively smaller span of time where he is not Spider-Man. And still we get to see some action. Like he ends up getting bit fairly early on. Here though, it's like half the damn movie.
Yeah, and I think that there's like executives assume that no one's got any prior knowledge. They did this as well with Amazing Spider-Man, following on from the Raimi ones. Is like they tell exactly the same story, and then they're forcing themselves to try and tell it in a different way. But actually, give the audience some credit. Give them some leeway. Like, we'd had 2 big budget Fantastic Four films by this point. People know who the Fantastic Four are. So you can start off midway through, and then because it's a new cast, because it's a new way of telling the story, you can tell the origin story, but you don't have to spoon feed people in the same way that you maybe, Raimi's film, first big budget Spider-Man film. So Spider-Man's a popular comic book character, but the general public maybe not as aware. By the time you get to the Amazing Spider-Man, everyone knows who Spider-Man is. You should, in theory, be able to go straight into the action. It didn't. It treaded the story. And it's the same with this. They could have gone, as you said, straight into the action and then told the origin story in flashbacks or something like that. So I just feel like it was, it wasn't giving the audience credit for actually being aware of what they're watching. And I think that's just all too common. I think what we're going to get with the MCU Fantastic Four is they know that people know who the Fantastic Four are. My understanding is that we're not going to get the standard origin story. I may be proved wrong, but it feels like they're going to do something a little bit different with it.
I mean, I think it's telling that the trailer we've seen so far starts off with them giving like a TV special tour of the Baxter building, and you've got, Thing talking about, criticizing Herbie's cooking. So I think in his rock form. So I think that's really telling about what kind of tone they're definitely aiming for with that. But also, and you're a writer, so maybe you know about this. Have you ever read Blake Snyder's Save the Cat?
I haven't, no.
Do you know about it though?
The name rings a bell, but I'm not massively familiar with it.
Okay, so Save the Cat is this book that Blake Snyder, who was a Hollywood screenwriter, he passed away a few years ago now, but he was a Hollywood screenwriter, not responsible for some of the greatest movies. Like, we're talking the guy who wrote like Miss Congeniality and Blank Check. So, but Save the Cat, and it is a really good book on screenwriting structure and story structure in general. However, you read that book and some of the examples he leans on really makes you question Hollywood brain. And one of the examples that I love to point to in it, and you were talking about Spider-Man, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and this is one of the examples that he says of a way not to do something. He talks about how if you're going to have unnatural elements or like, weird stuff, unusual stuff in a movie, they have to come from the same source. You can't have two different sources of weird things. Otherwise, that breaks the viewer's brain. The viewers can't put those things together. And the example he used was the fact that Peter gets his powers from the spider, but Norman gets his powers from from a different source. And he says, like, they should have linked those things together. I'm like, no, you don't have to do that. Nobody had a problem following that in the movie whatsoever.
That's one of my biggest bugbears, especially of Marvel movies, actually, is that the villains, certainly in like the first film of any of the kind of sub franchises, the villain is like a carbon copy of the hero. Mm-hmm. It's like Incredible Hulk, you've got Hulk versus Abomination. Ant-Man, you've got Ant-Man versus Yellow Jacket. They're the same character fighting against each other, and it's just so dull. Like, I want to see one power versus something completely different, because that's exciting and interesting and different. So I strongly disagree with that element of it needs to come from the same place, because that's just boring.
Yeah, exactly. And so going back to this, like originally, here's some stuff about the original version that he had. So Doom's name was actually not going to be Victor Von Doom. They actually changed that in post-production using ADR. And you notice whenever they say Doom, whenever they call him Doom, it's always off screen.
Yeah.
And so his original name was Victor Domashev, and Trank's original script saw him as an antisocial programmer with an internet persona called Doom, which, if you're going to reinvent Dr. Doom, like making him the CEO of a company is not the greatest, but making him an antisocial programmer is just like the dumbest thing possible. This is the grandest villain in the Marvel universe, and you're going to reduce him to incel territory. It's insulting.
Yeah, he's the ruler of Latveria. He's this feared sorcerer. He's a technological genius. But yeah, we'll just make him some dork with a computer screen. Mm-hmm. It was really, yeah. I mean, and there's still elements of that when you first meet him in the film. He's sitting playing games and like moody teenager in the dark kind of thing, and I'm like, oh, that's just did not like that. I don't feel they didn't do him justice. There's a moment at the end of the film when they're back on Planet Zero, and he says that Reed says Victor, blah blah blah, and he goes, there is no Victor, there is only Doom. And I was like, oh man, it just made me think of Ghostbusters. All I could hear in my head was, there is no Dana, there is only Zool. And like, it's just so funny. It was like,
Yeah.
they were trying to go for something so serious, and it just made me burst out laughing.
And also this idea of, well, first off, I don't think, and this was my biggest problem with the Ultimate Fantastic Four too, is like, I don't think this concept really works with them all being like teenagers. That works great for the X-Men. That works great for Spider-Man. It works for Superman if you're doing something like Smallville and you're setting it before he became Superman. Yeah. But it doesn't work for Batman, as we saw in Gotham. It doesn't work in the Fantastic Four, as we saw in this movie. And it doesn't work for Iron Man, as we saw in the Armored Adventures, animated series.
Yeah.
So this doesn't work for these characters. Like, Reed being a boy genius, okay, but like, the whole thing, my biggest problem when I'm watching him and Ben, these two characters have to have like the closest friendship in the Marvel universe. They are the quintessential odd couple. And there should be, you should look at them and understand why they're still friends. Because otherwise they're just completely mismatched. And I think a good example of this is, honestly, and people might laugh when I say this, but Channing Tatum and Jonah Goldberg in 21 Jump Street. That right there is the model for that relationship. You have the put upon dork, but you have the big jock. And I'm not saying that I want, Reed Richards to be played by Jonah Goldberg, but like that type of dynamic where they're complete polar opposites, but you can still see their friendship shine through.
Yeah.
That science fair scene. Well, first off, that science teacher is just an unbelievable idiot. Like, obviously, this is not a magic trick. Obviously, there's something happening here. And any science teacher worth his salt would be like, oh my God, what just happened? Can you explain what did you do? How did this work? Something, not just completely dismiss it out of hand. And so that was one issue I had with that right at the beginning. But also, it's just like, Reed treats Ben almost like a servant. Like, there's no feel for like a friendship between them. And like when that kid called Reed a dick, I'm just like, yeah, you are a dick. You come off as a dick. Like, the whole thing about Reed is he's a decent guy, but he's just absent-minded, right? He's the quintessential absent-minded professor. He's all this stuff about Reed Richards is an asshole is just like internet brain, I think. And it's just like, that's not who the character is. And so, and I think if you go back to the Tim Story films, Ian Gruffett, I think, did a good job of capturing that kind of like absent-minded. He just gets so singularly focused on his work that everything else fades in the background. But you can still see that he cares for his friends in that movie. This Reed, I don't get the sense that Miles Teller's Reed Richards cares about anyone but himself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that he's kind of singularly focused on achieving his goal, but not in that absent-minded way. I think you're right. I think he is far more kind of self-centered. I mean, even, when you get to that second part of the film and, he's like, I'll find a way to fix this for you, Ben, and all that stuff, but it didn't feel real. There wasn't that same connection. When you look at the Tim Story films, and you've got the even the dynamic between Grufford and Chiklis there is better than this. There's you feel like there's more of a friendship there. It's again, that felt a bit rushed. The whole like, yeah, I'm breaking into your junkyard. I've stolen the stuff, and now we're friends.
Yeah, it really felt like that was just Reed's ploy to get Ben not to turn him in or to kick his ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, there's no sense of any sort of friendship between the two of them, really. And also, I thought like how they brought Ben into the Planet Zero thing in the first place, which is very bizarre. It's like him, Johnny, and Doom are drinking, and they're gonna, build this shuttle they're gonna go into the other dimension. And then Reed says, oh, hold on, I got to call my childhood best friend to come over first. It's like, he's not mentioned to think about Ben this entire time. And then Ben's just
Yeah.
like, all right, I got nothing to do. I guess I'll come over. And then you leave Sue out of it completely, too, which also felt weird. So it's just like everything about that sequence just feels off for these characters.
Yeah, yeah, that's really, as I say, that's kind of the part where it kind of, where it really fell apart for me. Like, I could forgive some of the flaws in like building the friendships because I was kind of just enjoying I was just enjoying the kind of sci-fi element of, hey, let's build a machine together. Kind of almost not even considering that it was Fantastic Four. It was just, I liked that as a story element. But yeah, once it got into that point of, I was rewatching it going, why isn't Sue with them? Like, I actually remembered Sue being with them, and then I was really confused when she wasn't. Like, I'd misremembered that.
Was that what's that called? Mandela effect.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember that stuck out to me. That was one of the things that stuck out to me, I think, the most the first time I watched this film, was the fact that Sue wasn't really part of that thing. And then she only got her powers kind of like by accident when she pulled them back through. And it just like, it felt completely, it almost felt like they forgot that Sue was supposed to be in that scene.
Yeah, yeah, kind of. Yeah, this film does not pass the Bechdel test. Let's just put it that way.
No, not even close. I mean, yeah, it's just like, I think of all the characters, I think Sue and Ben suffer the most from this movie.
Yeah.
Like, they get nothing. They get nothing. I mean, even, and it's not much, but even still, Johnny gets a small, tiny bit. And Michael B. Jordan, God bless him. The man is trying with what little scraps he is given in this movie.
I know. I find it quite interesting that both of the kind of the big screen Human Torches have really redeemed themselves in the MCU. And I was thinking about Chris Evans and Michael B. Jordan. I mean, they were dealt pretty rough hands first time round, but man, did they kind of pull it off later on.
Did you ever see the Roger Corman Fantastic Four movie from 1994?
I've not seen it yet. I would love to. I've seen the trailer and I've watched the Doomed documentary about it.
That's a good documentary, yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, but I've not actually sat down and watched the film yet. So there's definitely one that I want. Rewatching this made me want to go back and rewatch the Tim Story films because it's been quite a few years since I've watched them, and I kind of. Yeah, I feel like I was like, oh, I really want to watch them just for a bit of levity after this one. But yeah, I really want to go back and watch that Roger Corman one.
I mean, the effects, it looks like shit. It's just looks terrible. And they even addressed that in that documentary. They said, Ole Sasson, the director, he said he makes point of the fact of saying he's like, the actual movie would have looked better than this. Like, these bootleg versions you're seeing, they're from VHS transfers, so they're very bad quality. Even still, I can't imagine it's going to look monumentally better if they did a proper restoration of it. But even still, it's one of the things I will say about it though is it is an earnest movie. I think everybody involved in it really was earnest about trying to do the FF justice. And
other than Roger Corman.
I mean, I think Roger Corman, he was just producing it for a paycheck. He didn't direct it, but everyone else involved, I think it was just kind of like, you know what, we really want to try and make this work. And I think if you're dealing with a budget that small, that's probably the best you're going to get out of a Fantastic Four movie. But I will say though, you got to think Jay Underwood, who played Johnny Storm in that movie, he's probably just sitting by his phone every day now that he sees that Chris Evans and Michael B. Jordan got a Shadow Redemption by Marvel Studios, and he's just sitting there. He's like, any day now.
There's been all this talk about the Council of Reeds potentially appearing in the upcoming Fantastic Four, and I'm just really hoping for wasn't it? Was it Alex White something? Or
Alex Hyde White, yeah.
I'm just really hoping that he's going to appear in the in that Council of Reeds. It would be really nice, kind of like redemption arc. You've got John Krasinski, you've got Miles Teller, you've got Ewan Grufford, and then if he came in as well, I thought that would be really cool.
That'd be really interesting.
Whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. But yeah, I actually did think about that film when I was watching this, because this film felt, they didn't. The struggles in making this film were well known. Josh Trank being a bit elusive and a bit aloof on set. I say a bit, but we're always dealing with secondhand reports. But Josh Trank's behavior has been called into question on set. The studio interference is massively apparent. You can tell where the reshoots are because they're all wearing bad wigs and have facial hair where they didn't have it before and things. You can tell that this is a film that has been Frankenstein together from lots of different ideas. But it really reeks of, we're making a film. The only reason we're making this film is to hold on to the rights.
Yes.
And that made me think back to that 1994 film that obviously, potentially, most likely made to hold on to the rights. Whether Roger Corman ever had the intention of releasing it is up for debate. And it made me think, for Marvel's first family, for the comic book family that started the superhero thing in earnest, and certainly in terms of Marvel, what bum deal they've had when they've had 2 films that have been made just to hold on to the rights.
Yeah. And then the other 2 films that were made in earnest still had a lot of problems with them.
Yeah.
And also, and then the animated series, right, was not very well received either. So this is a property that a lot of people have been trying to crack this nut for a very long time, and it looks like we may finally get it happen with First Steps. But it's really surprising.
This film was so badly received, and Marvel was so annoyed that they didn't have control over the rights that they basically stopped making Fantastic Four comics for a few years.
Well, I think that was not so much because of this film. That was more because of what's his name? The guy who was head of Marvel Comics at the time. He's been fired since then, but he was basically his whole thing was he didn't want to make X-Men or Fantastic Four comics because Fox owned the rights and he felt it was promoting their competition. So he had basically forced Marvel to cancel the Fantastic Four, which it's never been a massive seller in recent years. So they were able to kind of get away with doing that. But when it came to the X-Men, they're like, we can't cancel the X-Men. So instead he tried to pivot by making like his whole idea was like, I'm going to make the Inhumans the new X-Men, which was terrible. Yeah. Did not work at all. And then as soon as he was, shuffled off of Marvel, like right away, they do a big whole X-Men push. They bring the Fantastic Four really big style. So it says a lot that that's what happened as soon as he was gone. But also it's just, and just like, as far as Josh Trank's behavior goes, like apparently he didn't want Kate Mara in this movie. He had wanted Allison Williams to play Sue Storm, but Fox overturned him and they cast Kate Mara. And he was so angry that he treated Kate Mara terribly on set. Like he was bullying her on set and shit like that. And it's like, dude, this is not her fault. Like she's the one who got picked. Like taking it on her doesn't make any sense. And then apparently, funny thing though, is like he had also pushed for Miles Teller, and then him and Miles Teller like almost got in a fist fight on set. So this was definitely not an interesting thing to be in.
I almost want to see a Doomed style documentary on the making of this one as well.
I think it'd be very interesting. Yeah, it'd probably be more interesting than this movie was.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the things like I think that you're looking at this and you spoke about the effects in the 90s film, and then you think about the Tim Story films, and the effects are they're passable for the time. They weren't bad effects, I don't think. I think that there's definitely a feeling of effects moving on a bit for this, but I don't know, like Mr. Fantastic, that kind of little stretchy thing, it just looks goofy, and it doesn't fit with the grounded tone of the film. I think that at some points, I think the Human Torch looks great. And then other points, there was a bit, when he lands, he's got that trail of flame that you expect. and you think that's great. But there was a scene early on, I think it's when he's he's doing the flyby of the plane and he shoots down the drones, and then he flies and lands in the military complex. And when he's flying to the military complex, there's no trail of flames or anything. It's basically just an orange dot moving across the screen. And I thought, come on, this is made in 2015. We had better effects than this. And I was like, in fact, the Human Torch flying in the Tim Story films looked better.
Oh, yeah.
So it was kind of like, it was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It just didn't. It was like not enough care was given on all sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the actors are doing. You said before, Michael B. Jordan, he's trying his best. I think most of the actors are really trying their best, but there's not much there for them to work with.
Yeah, I think it's just Jordan is just such an excellent actor that I think his best comes through a lot better than any of the others do.
Yeah.
And the fact that he is the script gives him a little bit with like the father-son dynamic there. But it's also like the whole concept of this as superhero powers as body horror. Again, very interesting concept.
Yeah.
Not for Fantastic Four. And like you said, when you try to do that very serious, grounded, horrifying thing with a guy who's basically, living rubber, it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Like, I think Fantastic Four has to be, because like human stretchy powers, I don't think technology is ever going to make it not look ridiculous. I mean, they haven't shown them in any of the First Steps trailers we've seen so far. And I think it's because I think that they want to hold back on that just because they don't want anyone to be judging it unfairly, because it's a very difficult thing to get right. And I think you have to buy in. It's the tone that has to be set with that type of thing.
I think if you're going to go down the body horror route of that sort of thing, you've got to make it like he is very reluctant to stretch. He'll only do it in certain circumstances. Every time he does it, you're going to hear the cracking of the bones as they stretch, and it's going to be disjointed, and it's not going to be as fluid and rubbery as it ends up being. He does that kind of classic like wibbly wobbly thing where his body like moves out of the way of stuff in that final fight scene, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't fit with the aesthetic of the film. If you're going to go down the body horror route, go all in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, and that works with like Ben, right? The body horror stuff obviously very clearly works with him. But it doesn't really work with, Sue, it could work, I guess, if you're trying to focus, like maybe she's having difficulty controlling like what parts of herself turn invisible or something like that. Maybe. Yeah. But even so, like it's not invisibility is not really a body horror type thing. And Johnny, I guess if you have him like covered in burns or something, you have him being affected somehow, then maybe it can work. But Reed, it's just very hard to make that work at all. And it's like it works with Ben, it doesn't really work with the others on the same level. And again, interesting concept for a superhero movie, but this is not the one to do it with. And I think that's the biggest. And also like the whole idea of basically at the end of the movie, they are pretty much this covert government group. Like they're not. And again, that's something that is not the Fantastic Four. Like you can do that with the X-Men to an extent. You can do that with the Avengers, but the Fantastic Four, they are celebrity superheroes. That's been baked into that concept from day one. You have to have that in there. That's one of the interesting things that sets them apart from all the other superheroes is the fact that they are these celebrities who are very popular. They're beloved by the public. That's something that really needs to come through more. And it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All
right. I think that's probably all we have to say about it. That's all I had to say about it. How about you? Anything else you wanted to say about Fantastic Four?
The thing that annoys me is right at the end when they're fighting Doom and it's the stereotypical big blue beam of light firing into the sky. We've seen that in so many films and it just drives me crazy. So a final plea to screenwriters to stop using big blue beams of light going into the sky being the destructive thing. In this film, at the very least, why not make it green?
Yeah,
everything about Doom and that planet is green, right? And then this big
he's even
blue
got the
beam
green
of light.
cracks coming through his body the entire time.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that just annoys me. But that's a bugbear of mine across many, many films.
No, I agree. Like that is just the those that was a weird time when like the sky beam was like a constant thing going on in the movies back then.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the hit, Ian, for watching this movie. But anyway, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, I mean, search for me online. There's not many people with my spelling out there. It's Eoin Smith, Eoin Smith. You can find me on Instagram at Ian Listens, or you can find me on Goodreads to find out where my fiction and stuff is published.
Okay, we'll have links to that stuff in the show notes, so please make sure to check that out. As for us, superherocinephiles.com is the website, and we are Super Cinema Pod on mostly Blue Skies. We're most active, but we are also posting release updates on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook, so you can check us off at all those places. And also, you can find out about being a guest yourself. You go to superherocinephiles.com. That does it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Hey guys, Perry here with a quick announcement. We're going to be taking a bit of a hiatus from new episodes for the time being. Simply put, I've hit the end of my episode backlog, and now that the university year has kicked up here in Japan, I've got my hands full. But I'm not leaving you hanging. In the meantime, we're going to capitalize on the Summer of Superman ourselves. What that means is I'll be reposting episodes of all the Superman movies we've covered over the years in the release order of those movies. You can also hear me on some other upcoming or possibly already released shows. I'll be appearing on Digging for Kryptonite at least twice, first to discuss the Our Worlds at War crossover from the early 2000s, and then to discuss the necessity of Clark Kent's secret identity. Not sure when that's going to be coming out. I'm also going to be on the Nerdy Romantics podcast to discuss Captain America, Brave New World. I'll be on Batman by the Numbers for a Batman Allies draft, and I've got a few things lined up for Krypton Report. So lots of podcasting action from me in other places. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to launch what I'm calling the Superhero Bibliophiles. This is going to be where we discuss superhero comics and books. It won't be as regular as the main show, but I'm going to start off by reposting all the old SCP Book Club episodes, which were originally Patreon exclusives. And we'll cap those off with the first new episode of this format, in which Eoin Smith from this episode will be on to discuss the Amalgam comics from the mid-late 90s. So it should be a blast, and I'm really looking forward to that. Until I'm back with regular episodes, you can reach out to me on Blue Sky, which I'm on under Super Cinema Pod. My own personal Blue Sky handle is Per Constantine. That's P-E-R Constantine, all one word. I've also got some new books coming up in these summer months, including a new urban fantasy trilogy I've co-written for Sterling and Stone, and the first book in that series, Monster Sitter, should be out in May. You can find out more about those releases by following me on Blue Sky or by subscribing to my mailing list. Remember, if you go to percivalconstantine.com/SCP, you can sign up for the list and get 2 free superhero novels and 1 free short story, and that link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening, thanks for your understanding, and I will talk to you later. Thanks for listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Superhero Cinephiles is produced by me, Percival Constantine. The show is created by myself and the late, great Derek Ferguson, our host emeritus. Visit us on the web at superherocinephiles.com to listen to past episodes or find out how you can be a guest yourself. Support the show by visiting our advertiser links or click the Buy Me a Coffee link on the website to make a one-time donation. We are Super Cinema Pod on both Instagram and Blue Sky, so please be sure to follow us. We'd also appreciate it if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and share us with your friends.
thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.